When I arrived this evening, we had a brief discussion down in the bar as to whether paragliding was a sport or a recreation.
Ooh.
I hope Brian's going to answer the question for us. One of the definitions I looked at was Ernest Hemingway's definition of a sport. And he said, there are only three sports: motor racing, mountaineering and bullfighting. And everything else is a game. But each of those three sports, under the Hemingway definition, has the possibility of killing you. Chess apparently is a sport according to the International Olympic Committee. It doesn't fulfil the requirements of physical exercise in competition, but it got through under the definition of mental exercise. I guess there's a bit of mental exercise involved in paragliding as well. Anyway, many thanks to Brian for putting this together, and also to Ian Ferguson. As you don't know Ian, we've flown together in India in the past. Ian's a coach and has taken part in a number of competitions, so perhaps at the end we can ask Ian a few questions about Gin-Wide Open, Ozone Open, Navita, etc. Anyway, over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Robin. Welcome everybody. A few new faces, people I've not met, so I'll introduce myself first of all. I'm Brian Greenwell. Some of you will have met me. Some of you might know my name because I'm a frequent poster on some of the Telegram groups. Probably a little bit too frequent. I ought to put the phone down sometime. But I've been flying for about 5 years. I learnt with Fly Sussex locally. I've flown about 400 hours, just short of 400 hours now. I'm retired, so I get out every time I can, locally. But I still completely regard myself as a beginner. There are a lot of guys in the club who've been flying for many, many years, a lot longer than me, and I do the best that I can to try and learn from talking to them and to experiences of other people, and try and learn from other people's mistakes and pick their brains. And that's been successful for me so far. So I'm going to talk about entry-level paragliding competitions. I'm not going to talk about any high-level stuff. I'm going to speak mainly from personal experience from the competitions that I've entered just recently, over the last couple of years. High-level stuff we'll be dealing with another time, perhaps, with another speaker with rather more experience. So, what am I going to talk about in detail? Things I'm going to try and cover today. Fundamentals, just some basic stuff to bear in mind about flying in competitions. The British Club Challenge is the main focus of my talk. The British Club Challenge. We haven't held a round this year, so it's going to be an opportunity for those of you that want to do your first competition to consider coming along and joining in with the British Club Challenge. So that's the main thing that I'll talk about, but I'm going to go through some other stuff as well. The XC League, which is a UK-based database of all of the flights that paraglide pilots choose to record on this national database, and it's something that's used for the scoring in the British Club Challenge. So you need to know about the XC League in order to score in the BCC. The British Paragliding Cup is another relatively low-level paragliding competition, but as I'll explain, it takes you on towards flying tasks and being rather similar to more high-level competitions, and so is another good stepping stone. The British Paragliding Trophy is another relatively low-level competition, but again it's moving slightly up the spectrum of international standard. I'm going to talk about the Southern Hang Gliding Club's Waypoint Challenge, which Andrew Krasinski put together for us last year, and is a very good way of getting to know your instrument and flying to waypoints just on your own. And then at the end of the year, comparing with other local pilots and seeing who can bag the most waypoints locally. Gin-Wide Open, I can't speak from personal experience, but I've got some information which I'll pass on to you, and Ian has flown in the Gin-Wide Open, I think, haven't you, Ian, in the past?
Yeah.
And so Ian can add to what I have to say about that a little bit as well. I'll talk about Air Tribune, which is a useful website and a resource for seeing what competitions are happening internationally, and is our route to applying, registering for international competitions. I'll talk a little bit about the kit that you need, which is not actually very much for taking part in competitions, and then I think finally I've got a little slot on retrieves to talk about one of the quite important issues about how you get back and pick your car up after you've taken part in a competition or XC flight. So, on the fundamental side that I said I would talk about, perhaps a quick show of hands. How many of you are recent CP qualified? 3, 4. Thanks very much. One thing to bear in mind is that in all competitions except the BCC in this country, you're not allowed to fly in them while you're simply a CP pilot. You do need to be pilot rated in order to fly in a competition, for good reason, because the BHPA want to make sure that you've got the experience to be able to do, to be in a competition. But the thing is with the BCC, as I'll come on to, is that you are allowed to fly in a competition. In the BCC, only CP rated. There is an exception. You can go XC if you're in a coaching environment or if you've been briefed by a coach before you embark on your XC flight. So if you find yourself up at Bo Peak one day and you fancy leaving the site and perhaps being able to fly along the ridge, or to see, other pilots are going cross country and you fancy doing that, technically you're not allowed to do that unless you've had a briefing with a coach before you do that. So there are always coaches on the hill. If you fancy having a go at XC, talk to a coach, and he'll talk to you probably about things that you understand about the airspace rules and other aspects of the particular flight that you might be thinking about. And under those circumstances, am I right in saying, Robin, that an XC flight would be permitted and you'd be insured for it?
It's more a case of briefing the coach what you're planning to do and demonstrating that you're aware of particularly airspace height restrictions. We're relatively free from airspace restrictions in Southern Club.
Indeed.
But if you're somewhere like Thames Valley, it's a nightmare, or Dunstable.
Yeah. I have to say that from personal experience, one of my earliest flights wasn't XC, but I did manage to bump into airspace flying from Devil's Dyke. And I was lucky enough to get into a Seabreeze front. Well, I felt unlucky at the time, actually.
Was that the 5.5, 4.5?
5,500 feet, yes. Yeah, on my ENA with about 8 hours under my belt, I think, something like that, yes. So it just shows you what can happen from one of our sites. No special equipment is required for any of the competitions that I'm going to talk to you about, other than a variometer in its as a standalone instrument is a very good idea. Have you all, those of you who are new pilots, have you got yourself a variometer yet, or not? Yes? The only other thing that you're going to need to put with that is some way of knowing where you are in the country in terms of where you are relative to airspace. And so you need either a map, which is very impractical flying a paraglider, of course, or you need a moving map on an instrument or on your telephone. And that's really the only two instruments that you need: a variometer and an app on your telephone.
Am I right? At a minimum, you can use Fly Sky High on a phone as a variometer, as well as your map. It may not be the most accurate, but it passes the test.
Yes. Yeah. So airspace is very important if you're embarking on XC and when you're flying in competitions, to know where you are relative to airspace. You don't need a special wing and you don't need a special pod. I know, again from personal experience, all of us in the club quite quickly move on from our ENA wing onto an ENB, a high B, and then onto a C, and we're quite quickly into pod harnesses. It's what most of the experienced pilots in the club fly, but it really isn't necessary. And you will see people flying in competitions in the BCC and in other competitions that are flying in open harnesses. And in terms of their glide ratios and the speed that they're able to fly, there's really only a very marginal difference. and you really don't need a special wing or any special equipment. You do need to be up for a bit of an adventure, because flying XC and flying competitions, you don't know where you're going to land. You might have a plan for where you're going to land, but 9 times out of 10 that plan is only partially successful. So, I mean, some people might be a little bit put off by the fact that they might come down in a farmer's field in the middle of nowhere and not know how they're going to get home. But I think for most of us that's part of the adventure of paragliding and going XC and taking part in competitions. But you don't know exactly where you're going to land, and you have to embrace that as being part of the fun.
Would you say taking money isn't important?
Taking money, well, less important these days, because again, if as long as you've got your phone with you, you can probably pay your bus fare and your train fare. But I always fly with at least 100 quid in my back pocket, just in case I need to bribe somebody. Or
you rent a car?
Yes. Is that what you guys do? Do you fly with a few quid in your back pocket? Yeah. Of prime importance, really, is the aspect of safety and flying with other people. Because in any kind of competition, you're going to be in a gaggle of other pilots, and you're going to be flying in relatively close proximity. And as I'll mention in a moment, certainly in the BCC, but also in the other low-level competitions, the people who are running it are very conscious of the need for safety. They do give very good safety briefings, and really it's the most important aspect of organising the event for them. So bear that in mind. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the other slides, but it's not an excuse for flying arrogantly or without regard to other people's safety and your own. Okay, so British Club Challenge, the main topic that I was going to be talking about this evening. It's a low-level competition where, as I mentioned earlier, CP pilots are permitted. It's endorsed by the BHPA, but it's run by volunteers. There's a couple of particular volunteers who step forward on nearly every occasion. Matt Tandy, and Tim Bishop. There's several other notable names who are the regular people who are running these events, but they're the two names that, from my experience, are the most regular people who run the thing. It's a team-based competition, so clubs around the country each put in, they pay at the beginning of the year a fee to enter a couple of teams. In our case, we entered 2 teams. Some of the smaller clubs only enter 1 team. Dover and Folkestone, I think, entered 2. But that's the idea, that you fly as a team, and then the scores that are put together by the team are all totted up. There are personal prizes, but it's a team-based event. Southern Club have 2 teams, Slackers and Southern Slackers and the Southern Skivers. Nice. But as I mentioned, it is a national event, so wherever the event's taking place, it might be in South Wales or in the Yorkshire Dales, there'll be clubs from all over the country who have people in their teams coming forward. So when you get to the event, it's quite a serious kind of feeling that, this is not just low-level stuff. It's a low-level competition, but you're competing with people from all over the country. So it feels quite serious. It's sponsored by Advance, which makes it sound quite high-flying, doesn't it? But Advance give Matt Tandy a number of T-shirts, I think is usually the thing, which he's able to give away as prizes. But it's good that it's sponsored by an internationally recognised organisation. It gives it a little bit of credibility, I think. Now, one of the wonderful things about the BCC is that they don't have a fixed date for it. It's governed by the weather. So when Matt Tandy or his team think that it looks like there's a good weather window coming up on a weekend, because it's always a weekend or a bank holiday, then they'll do their best to look forward in the weather forecasts 4 or 5 days. So once they see that there's a likely weekend coming up, then they'll post out messages, and people who've enrolled for it start to see that there's a prospect of a competition this coming weekend. So at home you can start making arrangements to get the children looked after, or make sure that the wife's got something to do. And then you're keeping an eye on the postings to see what's going to happen. And when it gets closer to the weekend, maybe just a couple of days out, they'll say, right, a round is called for coon gibbet, Saturday and Sunday, then you know definitely you can put your name down and start making arrangements with other people to get yourself there.
Is it worth saying, Brian, that we don't host any in the Southern Club because our sites are so busy?
Well, I was thinking about that as I drove over, and I think that's what I was told in early days. And I think it's probably reasonable because at the BCC they will get somewhere between 50 and 90 pilots from around the country.
On a good flyable day?
Yes, on a weekend when it looked good. I mean, I've only done 3 or 4 of these. There's never been less than 50. But if you add that 50 to the 50 or so that we would already have within the club at Devil's Dyke, it starts getting a little bit too busy, doesn't it? Bo Peep and Furl, you could potentially hold some kind of a competition there, but people are never realistically going to be able to go cross country other than on an exceptional day. So I think our club is just basically not suitable for holding around, and we never do. Maybe we could in the future, but we don't. So you're always going to be looking at going away to do it. But again, that's part of the fun really. I suspect that if we were doing it locally, it would be less interesting for us. It might be great for the guys from South Wales to come and fly on our side, but for us, it's much more fun to go away. They generally base them at a place where there is a campsite. And very often the campsite is the base for running the competition. And in a couple of cases, you can actually land back at the campsite if you're doing a bottom landing. They're generally large campsites, so the fact, 90 people turning up with their wives and girlfriends and camper vans and what have you seems to be okay. So that all makes quite an entertaining sort of event, and there's a lot of camaraderie. So that's another great aspect of the competition, really.
Brian, if it's a 3-day event and you can only make 1 or 2 days, is that an issue at all?
Put your name down for the one day that you can do.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It might be that there's somebody else who can only do the other day.
Yeah.
Of course, it's a long way to go for just doing one day, depending where the thing is. But I've done that, where I've only been available on the Saturday and I've gone along on the Saturday. Luckily, it was called off on the Sunday because it started to rain, I think. So, But yeah, that's absolutely fine. It might be that if the event's oversubscribed, if we've got 14 pilots for 12 places and you're only going to do one of the days, it might be that we might ask you to stand aside for somebody else who can do 2 days. Unlikely to happen, I think. So yeah, still go for it.
Yeah.
It's free to enter for a pilot. The club have already paid for the 2 teams to be in the BCC, so all you have to do is turn up, pay for your pizza and beer, whatever else, maybe a train fare home if you do a long cross country, or a bit of fuel money for whoever it is who does the retrieve. But there's no entrance fee to pay for the individual pilots. I mentioned that there are prizes. The BCC is really aimed at encouraging pilots to do a competition and to aim to improve on their personal bests and personal goals. So the prizes that they give are very much based on that. So there's a prize for the first ever cross country that a pilot does. So if you're a relatively new pilot and you manage to do your first cross country on a BCC competition, you get a prize. If you do your first UK cross country because you've been lucky enough to have a foreign holiday and it's easy to fly XC, some places that people go, but you've never actually managed one in the UK, you still get a prize. If you've already got that prize, but you turn up and do the next competition or one the following year and you improve on your personal best, you get a prize. And again, if it's your UK personal best, because your other personal best was abroad, you get a prize. But there's only one award per pilot per round, so you can't come away with 2 t-shirts. But as you can see, the idea is improve on personal bests, and that's what they encourage. Requirements. What did I say for requirements? What must we do? You must have a valid BHPA membership, which hopefully you've all got, otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to be a member of our club. You have to be a member of the SHGC if you want to fly on the Slackers or the Skivers. you do need to be at least CP Hill rated with at least 15 hours under your belt. You must have thermaled with others. That might not be huge, great gaggles, but it's more than just a bit of ridge soaring at Bo Peak or at Devil's Dyke. It's thermaling with other pilots, so that at least you know when you get to one of these competitions and you're surrounded by other people going round and round in a thermal, that it's not the very first time that you've done it. It's fine if you're relatively new to it, but at least get the experience of thermaling with other people before you go along to one of these competitions, because you might end up in a gaggle of 50 pilots, and that's not ideal for the first time you do it.
Am I right that whilst we have a right-hand turn rule for thermaling in the Southern Club, because these aren't on southern sites, it's first in the thermal determines the turn direction?
No. Well, that's certainly the case, because if someone's turning one way and you're going to join them, you have to go the same way. But for the BCC, on the morning briefing, which is a detailed briefing, they tell you what the turn direction is going to be.
Okay.
I don't like turning left, and they always seem to say it's left turns. And that's the way it is. The competitions will say to you what the turn direction is. Not for the whole cross country, but for within 1 kilometre of the site.
What determines the direction, do you think?
What determines it?
Yes.
Flip of a coin, or the whim of the guy who's doing the briefing?
Not local conditions, for example.
No.
Normally what happens is you have every other day. So one day it's left, the next day it's right, next day it's left, next day it's right.
Yeah.
Goes through the week, alternately, different directions.
Sounds dangerous.
To pay attention to the briefing.
Every day.
But it's a good thing, because I say that I prefer to turn right.
Yeah.
I ought to deal with that. I ought to make sure that when I'm out on my own, I'm turning left as much as I'm turning right. But we all end up with a preference probably. But by doing some of these things, it before you go and do it, if you get the chance, practice turning both ways, because the chances are they'll say it's a way that you don't prefer.
Steve Purdy might tell us off though for turning left.
Steve Purdy doesn't go.
You've got to get up to 1,000 feet or a kilometre away from the site, and then you can do what you want.
So how to join in? You want to join in, don't you? At the end of the presentation, we'll put this onto Telegram, so you can download it. Not because you want to look at the presentation again, but because on one of the last slides, I've put a load of links, useful links. But joining the Telegram group for the BCC Southern Teams announcements is an important one. You can see when the rounds are being called, and you can start to ask questions and interact with Paul Dowsett, who administers the thing for us. Paul has put together an excellent guide, better than the guides that most of the other clubs have done, I think. It's a detailed document where he's written up everything you need to do to register and to participate. It's all there in detail, and within his document, which is on the Google Drive somewhere, he has provided links and other helpful information. He's got a page on accommodation opportunities for all the different sites that the thing might be called. So it's all detailed stuff that I'm not going to attempt to go into here today, but the BCC guide has got all of this information, and I'll provide the link for that at the end of the presentation. You can have a look at it in your own time. So what you'll do is you'll register with the BCC. You can do that straight away. You don't have to wait for a future round to be called. You can register your interest, put all your name and details in, and then you're ready when an event is called to be able to say to Paul Dowsett, put my name down for this weekend. That in itself is also an excellent website with lots of information and detail that I'm not going to attempt to go into now. What you can do is browse the previous rounds that have been held, and you can look at the scores that the different clubs have racked up, for example, for last year. But then you can click on the detail, and you can look at the flights that were actually done and what scoring was done, and you can start to see what's been achieved by some people. You can see that some folks will have done quite good flights, but you'll see that a lot of people never got away from the hill. They were probably perfectly happy, you know, they'd had a nice time, but they'd never actually gone cross country. You don't have to. It's all just a fun event and you do what you want to do. But being able to browse the previous rounds is very useful and interesting. And for us, I don't know why he's not doing this talk actually, but Paul Dowsett administers it for us, doesn't he? And he does an excellent job. Did you ask him?
I asked him 6 months ago, he said he was too busy with work.
Right, and probably true. But Paul does an excellent job for us of, I've never actually seen him at a round, but from home he keeps tabs on people, who's taking part, whether they're safely down at the end of the day, whether they're getting home okay, making sure that the thing's running smoothly for us as a club. So if you're watching this, Paul, thank you very much indeed for doing that for us. He does a really good job of that. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my story about doing my first BCC round. I had never really gone cross country before. I'd managed one little flop over the back at Caburn to land down near the gliding field at Ringmer, which was 5 kilometres maybe, something like that. Despite trying and hoping to go cross country. But I put my name down for the BCC. And it was called at, obviously you can't see exactly where that is, but it was at a site called the Borange near Abergavenny in Wales, and a campsite at Crickhowell. Crickhowell's a bit of a centre of paragliding in South Wales and in its own right. So we got ourselves up to the Borange, and I was in a team of 6 for the Southern Club, feeling extremely nervous, but quite excited about being in my first competition, you know. I'd gone down there with my caravan with my wife, so we were staying on the campsite with all the other people, and it was quite interesting when we first arrived, you know, driving onto a campsite. It's, you know what to expect at a campsite, but of course on this occasion there were about 90 paraglider pilots also there. And so you could see all the windsocks up, you know, and people who knew each other, and you could see that there was a little bit of a community there. So that was quite interesting, really, seeing it for the first time. Anyway, so we went up for the briefing on the Saturday morning, and Matt Tandy gave an excellent introduction and briefing on the hill, and then he handed over to Dennis Trussler, I think was the gentleman's name, who was one of the local pilots, who then gave a briefing for the site itself, the sort of local briefing, talking about what the XC opportunities typically were from the Borange, things to be careful of, what the public transport was like getting back, which is a little bit tricky in South Wales on a Sunday, I can tell you from experience. But I was very nervous and very excited, and looking around me, there was it was quite a popular weekend. There were 90 pilots. And there were all these guys, you know, with their dark glasses and visors and radios and microphones. And I thought, flipping out, these guys look as if they know what they're doing, you know, what am I doing here, sort of thing. And we launched, and I got into a really good climb. I put myself a couple of waypoints onto my Fly Sky High, which took me via Llanafon and Merthyr Tydfil, which were sites which also faced into the wind. So the Borange was into the wind, and then downwind I put these waypoints in, where I thought if I can get downwind a bit, at least I'll be able to soar on that ridge. And so that's what I was able to do. I soared on these valley ridges. And to cut a long story short, I got the best flight of the day on my very first day out. I was so chuffed. But I didn't really know what I was doing. You know, I was just in a good frame of mind, and I was lucky, and I happened to be in good climbs. But what a buzz that was! So thanks very much to the BCC for that. Following that, I've gone on and done a few more. I've not always been available for every weekend when it's on, but if I can, I go because it's a really good event. It's quite fun doing it as a team. Other paragliding competitions are generally individual things, and you're not part of a team. Another aspect of the fact that you're in a team means that not everybody gets away and does a long cross country. Some people will be getting back to the campsite earlier than you if you've done a longer one, and so there'll be other people on your team who might well be able to come and get you or pick you up from a railway station. But between us as a team, we generally get ourselves back to base much more easily than you can do if you're on an ordinary XC. So things are much easier going and learning to do XCs on a competition than they are doing it on your own. You're going away to a site which is a known good site on a known good weather weekend with an excellent safety briefing and site briefing, with people around you who are encouraging and helpful, and it's just a recipe for, kicking off your XC career in a really good way. So I can't recommend the BCC highly enough. Now I think I'll go on
just occurred to me, just if you're off a site that belongs to another club, shall we say,
yes.
do you have to get day membership for the...
No, that's a
for the
good question.
sites?
No, you don't. That's all part of the arrangement with the BCC. So, no reason not to do it. Okay. Oh, I put this together just to show how the scoring works a little bit. You can't read it, but this was 2022's rankings, I think. This is the Southern Slackers and the Southern Skivers, perhaps. Perfectly reasonable result from them there. But the fact that this group here, the Southern Skivers, it's not a definite group of 6 people, it's a different 6 people on different events. But you can see that we've only had a team in for 3 of those events, or 3 of those days. There were spaces available. So, in a club with 657, I don't know how many members we've got now, it's quite surprising that we don't fill up these places. It's a shame that some of the more experienced pilots don't come along and do it as well. Some do, but most don't, and I think they're missing out on a really good weekend away. And to some extent, we need the experienced pilots to be able to go along and captain the team. So you've got at least one experienced pilot with a team of 5 others. So I would encourage more experienced pilots to come along and do this as well. I've got some other bits of bullet points here. Yes. So the BCC, the scoring is simply how far can you fly. You don't have to worry about going around any particular turn points or doing it in a particular time. You're not flying to goal. You just launch and you try and stay in the air as long as you possibly can and go as far as you can. What we then do is we upload our scores into the XC League, which I'll speak a little bit more about in a moment. Put your individual scores into the XC League, share a link to that with the BCC organisers. They then pull the data from the XC League and work out the scoring. They then put it together as a team total, and the team totals, they have some kind of calculation that they do to work out the rankings at the end of the weekend. Usually takes them to about the Wednesday to work out the scoring. But by the end of the weekend, you have an idea how you've done as a team, and then you hang on until the Wednesday to find out actually what the final results are. They have to confirm that no one has bust airspace, because if you go into airspace, then your XC League score is automatically deleted after a couple of days. Individual prizes that I spoke about. So there we are. So XC League. Quick show of hands. Have you all registered for hands up who hasn't registered for the XC League? Okay, several of you. So it's worth me mentioning that. Good. The XC League is it's a database. It's a bit like X Contest. X Contest works globally. If you've listened to Gavin McClurg's Cloud-Based Mayhem podcast, you'll have heard him talking about the global XC League scores, X Contest scores, I'm sorry. XC League works for the UK. So it's a UK database of all of the registered flights of pilots in the UK. Most pilots, once they've been flying for a few years, create themselves an account in the XC League, and it enables you can put up all your flights on there if you want to, or in my case what I do is if I've flown a flight that I'm particularly pleased with, even if it's a relatively short one, but in difficult conditions or something, I'll put it onto the XC League. That enables me to have a short list of my good flights, other than, because I've got my own sort of files full of thousands of flights that I've done, but most of them are bad, some of them are good, but the ones that I put on XC League are the ones that I'm pleased with. So it's good for that. It also enables you to compare on any given day how you did, what other people in the country did. You can look at what other people in the club did, you'll recognise a few names. And then having done that, you can click on their particular flight and you can see where they flew to. And if you want to, you can download their IGC file and have a look at it. You can then put their IGC file into Sports Track Live and you can actually see them go cross country and you can see them making their decisions and just get an idea from what someone else has done, what's possible. It's free to start an XC League account, and you must do it if you're going to join the BCC, because you need it for the scoring. £6 optionally if you want to get your score into the National XC League, which obviously isn't important, but it's just something that you might want to do, and £6 is pretty cheap. As I say, you can browse flights by others. After a little bit of playing around with the thing, you can pull up previous flights. You can look at yesterday's flights, for example. You could look at last Tuesday's flights. You could look at flights by Brian Greenwell. You can look at flights by Andrew Krasinski. There's a few guys at the weekend who did a really good triangle from the Malverns. And it's interesting, to, having learned about that, to say, oh, what did they do? Where did they fly? Go on to XC League, a couple of clicks, download their flight, and you can see exactly what they did. It's a really powerful tool.
Is it the primary one that people use in the UK, or do they use X Contest as well?
I think most people probably use both. X Contest for the really good flights, XC League for a UK cross country. But if someone's done a record flight, you'll probably find it on X Contest as well. Yeah. This is a screenshot of the southern section of the XC League. So if a paragliding club in the UK pays a small subscription to the XC League, then we get our own league within it. So this one is showing the league for Southern Hang Gliding Club within the UK. We've only just started doing this for the last couple of years. Previously it was on our own website. So if you wanted to look back at the history of flights a few years back, you'd see that on the Southern Hang Gliding Club site, and you'll see the record flights, and you can do a similar thing in terms of looking at the details. But for just last year we started doing it. We've used XC League for recording our own league. So let me see, was this last year? No, I beg your pardon, this is this year as it stood this afternoon. So it's the Southern Hang Gliding Club showing all flights for 2023 with standard scoring. And this is the league. And it only goes down to 16. We've got 650 pilots in the Southern Hang Gliding Club. Here is your chance to get yourself on our league, because the lady at the bottom of the league, Inga, has got one flight in of scoring 1.1 kilometre. Right? Andrew Krasinski hasn't loaded his triangle yet for the weekend, because as soon as he does, he's going to be at the top probably.
That was in Wales though, wasn't it, Brian?
That was from Malvern.
Yeah, so it doesn't count on the southern, does it, I don't think.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
It won't count, will it? Because it's not from a southern. Not from a southern side. Yeah, you're quite right. Quite right. But in the UK league, he's up there. That's right. Anyway, as I say, sorry.
Am I 9?
Yes, you're 9th.
Oh, right.
Congratulations, with only one flight. What was that in?
That was a couple of weeks ago, just from the dyke.
Right, yes. Where did you land?
At the other, at Bow.
Oh, right, yeah, good, good. You can click on, where these are green or blue, these are links, so you can click on that and you get a quick snapshot of where the flight started and finished, maximum speed, maximum climb rate, average speed over the course, and then as I say, you can download the IGC and analyse it. Really, really good tool. So Ian's on there, is anybody else on there?
I'm on there.
You on there, Steve?
4, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
All
Yep.
short ones, but I'm just starting to get into it, to be
Oh,
honest.
it's early yet, isn't it? Yep, yep. Robin, you're not on here, eh?
No.
Do you not bother?
I don't do an awful lot of
Right.
flying these days, all cross country.
There's our chairman, John Tursack.
I'm recreational rather than competition.
Absolutely, yeah, fair enough, yeah. For me, this is part of the recreation, because I'm not very techy, I'm not a geek, but I love all this technical side of paragliding, where you have to, you know, you analyse your flights, plot your waypoints, all that kind of stuff. I love all this.
I found it really improves yourself as well, because you can look at other people's flights, see what they do, and you can see the lift points, you can see where they've done really well, and
Yeah.
you know, if you do a flight of your own, you can kind of try and emulate that as best as possible.
Yeah.
And
Time of day that they
it brings
launch
on
it.
your own flying that way.
And the other thing that I find interesting is looking where they landed.
Yeah.
Because when I did my first few X's, I didn't worry too much about where I landed. I was just pleased that I got away from the hill, you know. But then when you look at these guys, you'll see that they're all coming down next to railway stations, bus stops. There's a bit of thought required in the last 1,000 feet when you know you're coming down to the ground.
Yeah, last weekend I landed middle of nowhere and had no phone signal, so
That's
it's
it,
not
yeah.
ideal.
Okay, the next one. So that's the XC League. The British Paragliding Cup is another low-level paragliding event. This one is not held as often as the BCC. Are we doing all right for time?
Yeah.
Not held as often. They just hold a couple of rounds a year. They typically hold one round in the UK on a fixed date, and then one round abroad on a fixed date. Unfortunately, last week was the fixed date for the British Paragliding Cup this year in the Dales, and it was blown out all week. So I put my name down for that, paid my £90, but it was called off. I paid for my accommodation as well, which was a mistake. I've got my £90 back, but not my accommodation. But that's the trouble with the UK, that the weather is a really big issue. And again, that's one of the real strengths of the BCC, because if you put your name down to do the BCC, you're pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be a good, flyable couple of days. And you can't even guarantee that in Europe, actually. So the British Paragliding Cup, 2 rounds, one in the UK, one overseas. They generally hold it over a slightly longer period than the BCC. It's over somewhere between 4 and 6 days. Again, they base it on a campsite like most competitions. They do use set tasks using waypoints to a set goal, and they score it for the fastest time. So this is much more like a real competition, much more so than the BCC, where you're only going as far as you personally can. This is much more real. What they do is, for example, last week they weren't able to hold the UK round, but what they have done is they've created their own league in the UK XC League. So where I showed you the example that I showed you for the Southern Club, there's also one for the BP Cup. So for those pilots that have entered for the BP Cup, because they've cancelled the Dales round, it's not a complete washout, because we've got our own competition on XC League now for the best UK cross country, and they'll tot up our best 6 flights, and even though the round's been cancelled, there's still an element of competition there. They give small prizes. I think I won an XCP for my efforts at one last year, and a T-shirt. So not cash-based, not significant prizes, but nevertheless there's something to play for. If you're interested in taking part in that, then you register via their own BP Cup website, which I've given at the end. There is a round in Dales was cancelled, but they're holding a round in Sopot in Bulgaria. I can't remember exactly when the date is, but there are some spaces available for that one for anybody who's interested. There is an entry fee. It was £90 for the Dales, and it's £250 for the event in Bulgaria. This is an example of a task board from the British Paragliding Cup, and this is from what I know of it, typical of the kind of task board that you'll get for most paragliding competitions. If anybody's interested, I'll just go through a few of the items on there. Does anybody want me to just do that? Okay, so we've got basic task details, the date, that it's a race to goal. It's taking place at Parlick. I'm not sure what the next field is. He's got the height of the launch. He's given, no, sorry, I can't read that. He's given the launch point 1 kilometre around a turn point. He's referred to turn points down here too. Now the turn points are part of a list of turn points that the competition has issued prior to the event. So if you've signed up for the event, but before the event, they will have sent you via an email or a link to another website an ability to download a load of turn points. So you'll have downloaded those onto your instrument, your telephone, for Fly Sky High or XC track, and you'll have those turn points already in your telephone. So when they now say that the task is going to be from T16, he's given the details of that one, and you can find that in the list of turn points on your instrument, and you can put that in as turn point 1. You put the launch in and then you put that in as turn point 1. They then describe the rest of the task in varying degrees of detail, where you put in your subsequent turn points, and it gives a distance there. And then for the goal at the end, they will typically set a goal line which is at altitude, and it'll be a turn point, it'll be a radius around a turn point, so you know what you're aiming for to finish in the fastest time. But it's not a race onto the ground as some major competitions are. They're giving you a finish which is at altitude, at 1,000 feet or something like that. So you're crossing the finish line at altitude, you're not racing onto the ground, but then it'll give you a final turn point for the actual landing point. So you're not racing onto the ground, you're racing through the air, and then you're taking your time to gently land.
Yeah, most competitions, that's what they do. What you don't want to do is you don't want everybody racing to goal and everybody's all trying to land all at the same time and competing for time. So what they tend to put for actually all competitions now is they have an end of speed section, which is the cylinder which you race to, which is once you pass that cylinder, you pass the end of speed section, and then you can land whenever you feel like it, because then you don't have to worry about people below you, or you can give way to people to land, and it's not a bum fight to try and all land at the same time to get as fast as possible. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that's why they do it. It's for safety. And that's what all competitions will do that now. They call it end of speed section, which is a cylinder.
What this does highlight is that you need to know something about putting turn points and the altitude of the turn points into your instrument, which is best discovered before you get to the competition. So doing events like the BCC, doing the Waypoint Challenge in the local club, and setting yourself turn points for goals just around the local area is very useful, so you get yourself to the point that when you go to your first competition, you're used to putting in waypoints, and you can do it without being flustered, as many pilots are. They do go through, as part of the task setting, safety information, so they've got contact details, and they're going over and explaining again the nature of the start and the finish, as Ian has just said. And I think I've got a photograph of a small melee around the task board, because this is the BP Cup up on the hill at Parlick, I think it was, where the task board is laid out, flapping in the wind, and then everybody clusters around trying to program their turn points. I realised that the best thing to do is probably take a photograph of it and then go away in the peace and quietly till you've put your turn points in. So that was the British Paragliding Cup. So the next one level up, if you like, I think in the hierarchy of British competitions is the British Sports Trophy, which is a kind of new idea that one of these competitions that they've introduced, where they've capped the level of wing at sea, so that which they're these days calling a sports class wing, aren't they? So the British Sports Trophy is, you're not allowed to go along with your D or your CCC, so there's no Enzos or Xenos or anything like that. The maximum standard of wing is a C. And that reminds me that the first competition that I talked about, the BCC, I said you only need a basic wing, an A or a B. If you do happen to turn up with a C, which I did, I discovered after the event, having done my record XC, I said I got the furthest distance. I then realised that they take 10% off because you're flying a C. Yeah, so in a way, you're better off going with a B. Go with a high B. But the British Sports Trophy this year is being held in the Alps at Saint-Jean-Montclar on the 10th to the 16th of June. So it's a British event run by British people, but organised in the Alps because they know that the flying's likely to be good. It's a little bit more predictable than Wales and South Downs. There are still places available for that. There are somewhere between 6 and 10 pilots from this club that I know who are going, who've registered and paid. There are still some spaces available. The people who organise the British Sports Trophy, because it's a British event, give priority to British pilots. It's open internationally, but priority is given in the first instance to British pilots, so they save the first 90 places or something like that for British pilots and for lady pilots. There aren't many women in the event, but obviously the sport's trying to promote female participation, and so they've got a number that are allocated for female participants. But they sell this as being a relatively low-level competition which is aimed at getting people into competition flying. It'll be my first competition overseas, so I'm quite excited about doing this, and I hope it doesn't rain. So that's the British Sports Trophy. Sports Class Wings C's maximum. It's an FIA event, and it will score World Paragliding Ranking System points. As I said, it's run in the Alps because they think the weather will hopefully be more predictable, although they do have their days. Again, it's flying set tasks around waypoints to a finish goal in the shortest possible time. British pilots have priority, as I say, and I've quoted from them here: the objective is to find a British sports champion whilst offering an environment for up-and-coming pilots to compete on a more level playing field. So it's aimed at relatively junior pilots. There are still places available, applications via Air Tribune, which I'll talk about in just a moment. You do need an FAA licence, and Robin asked me, did I know whether it was IPPI 3 or higher?
I think it's suspicion it's
I think
4,
it's 4.
at least.
I had a good look at their website, and I couldn't find
I
anything
couldn't
to
find
say.
it either.
I think it's a bit of an odd thing actually, because you're really supposed to have a 5, but
just a quick word about how IPI works. It used to be a one-to-one correlation, even though the actual tasks done weren't the same. And basically, IPI 3 was club pilot, IPI 4 was pilot, and IPI 5 was advanced pilot. Now, the BHPA has issued advice. If you're a club pilot and self-certify that you've done, I think it's 15 hours, then they will give you an IPI 4. If you're a pilot and can convince me that you've done, I forget how many, 50 flights and at least 5 proper cross-country flights, then I can certify and send it off to the BHPA, and they'll give you an IPI 5. So you don't need to have an IPI, you don't need to have advanced pilot rating to get an IPI 5. You do need to have pilot rating to get IPI 4, or club pilot rating, self-certifying that you've done a certain number of hours since you qualified. So IPI 4 would make sense to me, IPI 3 would not make sense to me, because really that's a red ribbon.
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I think as well. In fact, I think if you're flying in Switzerland, you need an FP5. unless
Yeah.
you're under instruction.
I've had some pilots in the club, and when I say pilots, I mean pilot-rated pilots, who have been in touch with me to get an IP5 in order to fly in Switzerland. One of the good things now, though, with the BHPA app, you don't have to wait for them to send you a plastic or cardboard card with your rating. Once they've received it and issued the rating, it then turns up on the app on your phone immediately. So I've had someone who's left the country and his IP card has arrived on his phone basically as each touchdown in Switzerland.
Oh, that's handy. So don't be too put off about this IP lark. You'll get these ratings rather quicker than you expect, actually. The amount of experience that you need.
France is fine as well. France is fine most of the time. They don't care.
The thing about IP card, which differs from the FAI licence, the FAI licence has to be renewed each year. Once you've got an IP card, it lasts until you change your rating, so you don't have to renew it each year. So you only pay a fee when you take it out or when you upgrade it.
See that one, that FIA thing is a sporting licence, actually. They call it a sporting licence. Maybe that should be on the slide, but it's the sporting licence which I think costs 20 quid now.
Yeah, that's the FAI sporting licence
Yeah.
I'm talking about there.
Yeah.
Which is different from the IP.
It is different.
Yeah.
For this British Sports Trophy, there's a £250 entry fee, which seems to be a typical entry fee for an international flying competition.
Okay. Well, also the other things which,
Carry on.
there's other things that you might need to do if you're going on competitions. You also got to make sure that you've got some sort of certificate that your glider is up to I think 200 hours flying time. You have to get it, make sure it's certified. Otherwise, they will actually ask you to make sure that the wing is not out of spec. That's one thing you need to do, and also you're not flying overweight as well. Also, I know the Gym 1 Open will actually weigh you with your glider to make sure you're not overweight.
As you go through the application process for one of these competitions, you'll see the requirements that they have for particular insurance. The different competitions might have requirements that vary very slightly.
Insurance is important for overseas competitions.
Yeah,
In some countries you'll get medical care anyway, but if you're in a situation where you need to be repatriated, you really want insurance to cover that, and competition insurance has become increasingly expensive and increasingly difficult to get hold of. There is a Telegram group covering rescue and medical insurance for paragliding.
That's why a lot of competitions don't have prizes, because if they have prizes, then it becomes a professional competition, which then means that then you've got to say on your insurance that it's not an amateur event or a leisure, because you're getting there is a prize. But if there is no prize, then it's obviously amateur, and that's why they don't give prizes. That's why a lot of competitions will have you put your card in, and then there will have a draw at the end, and you might get a wing just randomly, not as part of the competition. That's why they do it.
Okay, we'll move on from that. The Southern Waypoint Challenge. This is more relevant to beginner pilots probably than talking about the British Paragliding Trophy. This is a club which is a competition which is running in our club. You probably already all know about it. Hands up if anybody doesn't know about the Waypoint Challenge. Okay, I'm not completely wasting my time. Andrew Krasinski, who's our club XC coordinator, I think that's his title on the committee, has put together a lot of waypoints. You can see all the blue dots on this. This map covers basically from one end of the Southern Hang Gliding Club's territory to the other. Devil's Dyke being around about here somewhere, and High and Over being over here. So Andrew's put together this list of turn points. There's about 75 turn points. They're 100 metre radius turn points, so they're quite small turn points. You put them all together in a file which can be downloaded from the Southern Waypoint Competition website. So you can get all of these waypoints down onto your telephone, and then the competition basically is who in the club over the course of the year can bag the most of the turn points. Last year nobody got them all. A couple of guys did particularly well, Tom Wycherley and James Chancellor. They're doing pretty well again this year, surprisingly enough. But the point is, it doesn't really matter how well you do, because it's quite fun just taking part. And when you're flying at Bo Peep, which is over here somewhere, you've got a set of waypoints which you can aim for. There's one over Alceston Village, there's one over Selmerston, and then there are a couple around the reservoir.
Very often, even when we got the red ribbons at Firle, I'll point out the church, because there's one above the church
Right,
in
yes.
Firle Village.
Yes.
You can see it from launch.
Yes.
Not necessarily fly there and back, but you can see it.
When the wind's blowing it straight onto the hill, it's surprisingly difficult to get out of some of these waypoints. So a lot of them are only within a kilometre or so of the hill, but they're surprisingly difficult to get to. And there's one that's particularly difficult to get to, which is this one over here over the Long Man, which I was pleased to bag yesterday. So I think I've got another slide to cover a little bit more about the waypoint challenge yoga. So this is the way it's scored. So this is for 2023 so far, year to date. Here's all of our different waypoints, cutting off at waypoint 75 at the end. We've got the names in order of how they're doing so far this year over here. Thomas Wycherley's got 23 so far, Sam Tolton's got 15, James Chancellor's got 12. There's also a competition not only for how many you can get, but how many you can get in one flight. So Thomas Wycherley so far has managed to get 7 waypoints in one flight. He's doing quite well. And it's early days yet, because we've only had a couple of thermic days when you can really make a choice about where you're going to fly away from the hill. So it's not about winning, it's about how many you can get, and challenge yourself to get the waypoints. And in doing so, you get used to putting the waypoints into your telephone, you get used to having them on your moving map display, and after a while you can get used to maybe setting yourself a route around them, or while you're flying, when you get yourself a quiet moment and there's not too many other people around, you can have a look at where there's a turn point nearby and think, I'm going to see if I can get to that one. And you can get to it and then see if you can get back to the hill. Doesn't matter if you can't, you might have to land out.
I think in some clubs, Brian, that also have a waypoint challenge, you do have to get back to the hill.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But in the Southern Club, it's not a requirement, but equally it's not a green light to bag a turn point at all costs and then bomb out. You're meant to try and at least have a chance of getting back to the hill.
Absolutely.
Okay, club pilots do this, or do you have to be pilot rated?
Club pilots,
They can, so it doesn't count as an XC,
it doesn't count as an XC.
because you're trying to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah,
right.
it might be an emergency, you might have to land out.
So you can always go XC by just intending to come home.
Well, there's always a risk that we're not going to get back to top land.
It's just the bottom landing a bit further away.
Right, okay, so club pilots can do XC because it's just the bottom line.
But by all means, have a chat with people on the hill. There's always a couple of coaches at least, aren't there? If it's flyable, there's going to be a few coaches on the hill. You might have to ask around if you don't know us all, but there are a lot of club coaches. And maybe you might need a bit of help with your waypoints. We can have a look at it with you and talk about, what you're going to do today.
You say
Safely.
you can do it on your phone. What do you need on your phone to?
You need, what kind of phone do you have?
Just a small phone.
iPhone.
An iPhone or an Android?
It's a Galaxy, yeah.
That's Android.
Yeah.
So you want XC Track. It's an app called XC Track, which is free. It will give you your airspace.
Make note of it on the phone.
Yeah, XC Track.
Literally, you download a file onto your phone and import it into the app, whether it be Fly Sky High or XC Track. And lo and behold, these will all appear. Then if you want to pick certain ones for a flight, you can do that.
So
Can I just
XC
say
track
one
is
thing?
the
I tend to use a thing called CU Navigator, which is for Android, and it's a free download. Well, it's a free download most of the time. But you can pay £50 a year, and you get extras for £50 a year. It's really, it's the same app as what you get on the OD.
Yeah, CU Navigator is very good, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's very good for post-flight analysis as well.
Skytrax still that. Skytrax
Yes,
flight.
yes, but it doesn't have the moving map display, to my knowledge. The Skytrax,
I think I'm talking about the
the yellow thing,
yeah.
yeah, to my knowledge, it doesn't have a moving map in the same way that the free apps for the telephones do. You experiment yourself. It's part of that's what I said about being a bit nerdy. That part of paragliding is if you want to take part in this kind of thing, you have to learn how the apps work on your telephone.
But all that downloading and stuff, you can do it in your living room.
Yeah, you do it at home, play with it, put yourself some waypoints in. You can even download one of Thomas Wycherley's flights. You click on this, so you get his flight, download the IGC, import it onto your phone, and see how it looks by replaying the flight on your instrument. But you won't do that the first day you play with it, but gradually over a couple of years, it's all part of learning this sport. You learn how to work your instrument, learn about all these web apps, and because there's a plethora. Most of them are free, some of them you pay a little bit of a fee for, but it's part of learning this sport, using the technology to add to your flying skills. So that's the Southern Waypoint Challenge. Gin Wide Open is something that I don't have personal experience of, but again it's a predominantly, well, it's not predominantly British, but there's a lot of British pilots participate, usually run in a European venue, somewhere where accommodation doesn't cost too much and travel is reasonably inexpensive, but they have good hills and good weather. So this year it's taking place in Macedonia at the end of July, beginning of August. It's limited to B and C wings. You could turn up with an A as well, but the point is that Ds and higher wings are not permitted. Again, this one is advertised as a learning event for beginner pilots to learn about paragliding competitions. Indeed, the Gin Wide Open, if you apply for it, they don't give people an immediate place, even if they're an early applicant, because they want to give priority to people who have never done the event before. So it's a good opportunity for not necessarily first-time beginners, work your way up to this kind of competition, but it's an entry-level competition where they want to encourage first-timers to learn about paragliding competition in a safe and friendly environment. There are still places left for this year's event. I'm not able to go, I've got another holiday already booked. €325, you need to get your own travel and accommodation sorted out. They have a prize draw, so that's their way of getting around this issue that you were talking about, Ian, about it's not a professional event, you're not flying for prizes that are worth money, but they give away holidays, they give away a new gin wing harness and all that kind of stuff. Anybody going to the Gin Wide Open? Maybe next year.
I did one thing about the Gin Wide Open. A couple of years ago, I was asked if I'd volunteer as a retrieve driver to go there and hang out.
Yeah.
And if you get a chance, I didn't do it in the end, but if you get the chance to do it, it does cost you a little bit, but you get quite a bit paid for. And it's a chance to hang out, see the competition, go out and pick people up from various fields dotted around the country. Yeah. And another good introduction to that level of paragliding competition.
Yeah, in fact, retrieve driving as a general subject is a good way to get to know some of the pilots in the club who are going XC. If you happen to be on a hill and you can volunteer to pick people up, start off by just picking up people at the bottom of the hill at Bo Peep, but you start to get to know some of the pilots in the club who are ambitious. Yeah.
So I've actually been to two Gin Wide Opens, one in Kosovo and the other one in Algiers. Kosovo is a really good place to go. If you ever get the opportunity to go, you take off at, was it 1800 metres? And if it's a good middle of the year, you'll probably get to 3,000 metres. So you're well over takeoff height, and it is just brilliant. The way that the venue looks is you've got a row of mountains on one side, which is where you're taking off, and then there's sort of like a moon shape, which sort of takes you round, sort of like the valley, and then you've got the town here, say, and then what then happens is you've got this huge expanse of open fields, and that's what they tend to do. They tend to take you out over the fields, or if they find that they want to do a long cross country, then they'll take you down towards the border. I can't remember what the border is, but they take you down the ridge, and it's just a brilliant place to fly. The only thing which I would say is that the conditions are quite strong, or can be quite strong. So you've got to be quite good at your thermals, good at sort of strong thermal conditions. And I would say that also the one in Algiers was also brilliant place to go again, but the thermals are really quite strong. More so last year because it was 35 degrees there, so it was quite hot, and you can imagine how punchy the thermals are. So that's the thing which you need to really worry about.
Yeah, when people say the thermals are quite strong, when I was a beginner, I wasn't quite sure what they were meaning really. You want to go into a thermal that's going up fast, don't you? But it's the hard-edged nature of them, Ian, isn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, they will take you up 8 meters a second up, and at some point or other you're going to pop out them, and then you're going to be on the other side of that, and you just got to make sure that it's well worth going on an SIB course, so that you've got, if the wing collapses, you know what to do. And I recommend that to go on any competition that you're going to in the Alps, is go on an SIB.
Anyway, I'm here to try and persuade people to go at their first competition.
But there's a bit of caution.
Yes, that's good advice. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
Moving on. What was I going to mention? I think we've talked about FAI and some of these overseas competitions. You'll need to apply for an FAI sporting licence and for a civil ID, CIVL, civil, and that they will give you a number against which your ranking will in the future be given. But worry about that when the time comes, and you'll find the application process. I've given a link to it later on here. Talked a little bit already about what kit you need. You don't need any special kit, basically. An ABOC wing. Your harness can be open or pod. You do need an instrument with your airspace display, so have a look at downloading that and start playing with that. One of the key things is the ability to record an IGC file. The IGC file is an international standard record of a gliding flight. It's encoded with some check digits in it, so that if somebody tries to alter it and put someone else's name, for example, to get a score that they didn't deserve, it creates an error on the file.
And also, what you need to remember to actually put your name on your instrument. Otherwise, if you submit an ICG file without your name on it, they will reject it.
That's a very good idea.
And also, because it's checksummed, and so you can't do it afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, that's something I was going to mention, that when it's coming in the early days of setting up your instrument and getting your logins to these various websites like the X Contest and the XC League, putting the name on your instrument, because it'll ask you pilot's name. Don't put something stupid on there, because it'll live with you for life.
Yeah.
Just simply put your name, and then you won't forget what it is. You'll know that that's what you put into XC League, and that's what you put into X Contest, and that's what's on your phone. By all means, put something else if you want to, but if you keep it simple and keep it the same on everything, then you won't have a problem with XC League not being compatible with a competition that you're doing and not recognising your IGC file. Carrying a spare battery is something that you'll want to start getting used to doing, because although the phones are very, very good for doing all sorts of stuff, you don't need to get anything like an UDI these days, I don't believe. But you do need to get a battery that you can plug it into so that it'll run for more than maybe an hour, because you'll want the display on permanently. And if you're doing even a decent soaring flight, you might be up in the air for a couple of hours. So you want to get yourself arranged with a phone and a backup battery. And in order to do that, you probably want to arrange some kind of a flight deck. If you're flying with a pod harness, it's all there for you. The flight deck is already built into the harness, and the Velcro's up there ready for you to stick something onto. But in order to have a battery and your phone stuck to something in your eye line where you can read it easily, then a flight deck, which is attaching to your carabiners, is something that you'll want to get yourself sorted out with. You can get them second hand quite cheaply. But for looking at your telephone, it's no good hanging it on your risers. It'll end up pointing in the wrong direction. By all means, have your vario on your riser, but you need your map somewhere where you can easily read it. And just experiment with it. Do it. Get it set up on times when you're just going soaring on the hill when it doesn't matter. And over a couple of years, I think it is, isn't it? Eventually, you get yourself into a position where you're comfortable with where your instrument is and the way it's set up. You might also want to consider getting a P-tube as well, because depending how long you can go between toilet breaks, if you're anything like me, right in the middle of a decent cross-country flight, you've got to land because of the call of nature. So an XCP tube is something that, again, you can get an experiment with and sort it out progressively over it's all part of the learning process. So you get to when you get to a competition, you haven't got a toilet problem. Okay, are we nearly there?
One thing that you haven't mentioned here, and Ian talked about reaching 3,000 metres, 9,000 feet. It's pretty cold up there. Any advice on gloves or hand warmers?
Well, my advice after I've been doing it 5 years, and I started off with relatively inexpensive gloves. I then moved on to using my ski gloves, which obviously got quite thick fingers, haven't you, with ski gloves? And I thought as a beginner, this is not appropriate because I can't feel the lines. But you can't feel the lines anyway if your fingers are numb, so you do need good gloves. I then moved on from ski gloves to ski mitts, and I then bought some cheap heated gloves, and I've now bought some of the most expensive heated gloves that I can get, which last for about 4 hours on medium, 2 hours on high, and I still get cold fingers. So I think the thing is that you might not need them next week, although the way the weather is at the moment, maybe you do, but you might as well go for it now and get a decent pair of gloves with heating. So in my experience, the gin ones are probably pretty good, about £230. Have you come across anything better?
I did have some mountaineering gloves, OR outdoor research.
With heating?
They weren't heated,
No, right.
but they were rated for
Polar.
8,000 metres.
Right, yeah. Were they alright?
Yeah, but still with tea bags.
Yes, yeah, tea bags are very good, yeah.
There's one thing about gloves which people forget about, and that is the fact that you might want to move your phone, move the map on your phone around, and if you've got your gloves on, the phone doesn't work. Because you can't.
Some gloves have touch,
Some of them
but
do.
that
Some
tends to
of
be a
them
finger rather than a mitt.
Yeah.
I have a little stylus that I've got stuck to my flight deck with a bit of Velcro, so I can quickly whip that off and use the stylus to there's various ways of going about it.
On a
Yeah,
lanyard,
good
no
gloves.
doubt.
Put lots of layers on, even in the summer. You get absolutely sweaty and horrible when you're standing on launch waiting for the thermal to come through. But as soon as you're up a couple of 1,000 feet, you cool down beautifully, and you really need the layers.
It is worth spending money on something like a hiking or mountaineering wicking top rather than a cotton t-shirt, because once a cotton t-shirt gets wet and cold, it stays wet and cold. Something that draws out perspiration and evaporates quickly makes a huge difference.
Yeah, merino wool or something. Yeah. Okay. A quick word on retrieves. How are we doing? There's not much more to go. You're going to need to join the Telegram retrieve group. Certainly for the BCC, we use Telegram to arrange our retrievals. There's a dedicated group for it, for BCC retrieves. It works in conjunction with a web app called XCRT Aero, which I've provided a link for later on. How many people have not come across this yet? A few of you, okay. What you can do, in simple terms, is in the Telegram group, you can share your location, which is just a paperclip icon, share my location, not your live location, but your actual location. So this is worth doing when you're at the roadside rather than in the middle of the farmer's field. So you share your location, and then you type in a message, #map, and a message. I am trying to get back to Devil's Dyke. When you do that, your pin will appear on this map. This is a web page. If you go to XCRT Aero, this is the web page that you will get on your telephone. And it will show you, for example, if you've been unsuccessful getting away from the hill, but you're feeling generous, if you open up this app, you will see these pins. This is one from a day or two ago, I think, when I'd landed. I think this was me here, and this is Sam Tolton. And Sam had typed into his app, #map, any chance of a lift back to Caburn, please, because we'd flown off from Caburn. We both landed relatively near the station. I was nearer the station than Sam was. It puts a pin on the map like that, so that the passing driver, and there are hundreds of us who use this app, if we're passing and we open up this map, we can see that where Sam is and that he's trying to get back. When he's got himself a lift, he just taps into the same Telegram group, #map cancel, and his pin is then cancelled with a comment if he wishes to put one. It's a very good way for us all of the paragliding community, to be able to see where all of the other paragliders in the country are who are needing a lift back. And it's also useful, even if you just have XCRT Aero as a link on your telephone, because when people are flying, you see there isn't one on here. Well, there is. There's an orange paraglider symbol there. You can just see it behind the dot of my location. But you'll see all of the people who are sharing their location using LT24, which is another app which you will get to know. Anybody who's sharing their live location, you'll see their location on the map. So you can see whether people are flying at Bo Peep or whether they're flying at Caburn. You'll see a few paraglider dots. And it's another useful adjunct to the weather forecasting apps and the Telegram groups for site reports. You can actually see where people are flying. If you click on them, you can go to you can look them up on LT24 and you can see what their track has been. You see how long they've been flying. And this is why yesterday a few of us who were at home, having been unsuccessful with our XC attempts, were then looking at Andrew Krasinski's attempts to do his triangle from the Malverns, because we could see his location on the map. Go to LT24 and see all the details. If you're flying in the BCC, the competition that I first talked about, that I was most trying to push to beginners tonight, and because we're in a team of 6, or possibly 12, if there's 12 of us going from the Southern Club, then as a group, we'll create our own Telegram group for the weekend. And so between us, we can arrange retrieves and share cars and so on. So that's how but again, we do still use this same app. So XCRT Aero, at the end of this presentation, I've got all the links so that you can look them up for yourselves.
What I was going to say was, the way I tend to do to get back from an XC is I walk to a pub, I get to the pub, I phone for a taxi. The taxi knows where the pub is, because if you just randomly call a taxi and you're in the middle of the field, they've got a clue where this field is. If you go to a pub, they know exactly where the pub is. You get the taxi from the pub, and you say, you either take the hit and just get the taxi to drive you back to your car at the site, or if you've gone a reasonable distance, you tell them to take you to the nearest train station and then do it that way. And I always find that's the quickest way of getting back from XCs, is just find a pub, you get a taxi from the pub to somewhere that you can get a...
Do you use this at all then, Ian?
No.
Because if you do, you'll find people who will share the taxi.
Well, yeah, I should really, but I just, yeah, that's what I tend to do. I just.
Okay, just a final recap. If you're new to paragliding competitions, join in with the British Club Challenge. We'll have a great time together. We really should, as the size of club that we are, we really should be able to get 2 teams of 6 along to every event. I don't know why we don't manage that. Perhaps it's because we haven't promoted the idea enough in the club, and that's why we're doing this talk now. Coaches on the hill, people like Robin and myself, and all of the plethora of coaches that we've got in the club will help you if you have any questions for them before you go. And when you get there, there will be a team captain who is experienced, to some extent at least, who will help you and guide you on the day. It's great fun, and you'll make friends within the club because you'll be going away in a team of people and sharing the experience. Thank you very much indeed. And then, go on to it. If you download this presentation, if we share it on Telegram, then hopefully you can click on these links if you want them to go to some of those things that I've talked about, like the XC League that you really ought to get signed up for. Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you all.
We're on a particular curfew, which should probably end down here by about 10. Before we break down to the bar, I realise I'm keeping you from another drink. Does anyone have any final questions either for Brian or for Ian about his experiences with the next level of competition beyond BCC?
Just one question, Brian. When you talk about distance travelled and stuff, is that actual distance over the ground irrespective of
It's
how
distance.
you got there?
It's distance as the crow flies.
From where you started to where you land?
Not necessarily from where you started, because if you start on a hill and you're going to fly downwind to a point down here, if you're able to fly upwind a bit first,
Yeah.
then that counts as your start position for the BCC.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be your furthest distance from
The two extremities of your flight.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I understand.
Yes.
So it's as you can.
That's one of the secrets really of getting extra distance in the BCC is to push into wind, catch a thermal, and then go cross country. Yes.
So it's not a distance over the ground.
No. No, it's not distance over the ground. That might be 100 kilometres, and you've only flown 30. Yes.
Just asking.
Yes. Good.
Are you doing any competitions this year, Ian?
Yeah, I'm doing the what do they call them? SRS competitions. So there's one in Macedonia in a couple of weeks' time, and then there's another one. You're on the same one. You know, you're doing that one. That's the British one, aren't you?
Yes.
And there's an SRS one the week before, I think. So
Where's that one, Ian?
The same place. Was it wherever it's called?
Oh, right. Saint-Jean-Montclar.
That's the one. Yeah. So I thought, well, as I was already over there, I might as well have 2 weeks holiday and then do both of them at the same time. I think Sam's doing the same thing. He's the one who told me about it. He said, "Oh, do you realise that there's this one as well?" So I'll do both. And then I think because it's a set of 4. So I'm also going to I name the place now. Go to a little bit, and then there's another one in Spain. The last one's in Spain. Yeah. So I've got 5 competitions this year.
Excellent.
If you look at the Air Tribune website, they post the results of competitions, and there's quite a number of Southern Club pilots who are taking part in various competitions here, there and everywhere. It doesn't get much publicity within the club, but it is interesting to see how our colleagues are getting on.
Yes.
I think the reason why I do them is because it's a good way of getting an organised trip away. So it's like a week, and you're going somewhere that you've never flown before, and you're there for a week, and you know you can probably get a reasonably good week's flying in that week, and it's just good fun. And you know your retrieves are going to be catered for, because there's usually a dedicated retrieve bus which will come along and pick you up. There's usually a telegram group where you say you've landed, and there's about 5 different commands. You say you've landed safely, or you haven't landed safely, and yeah, can't remember what the other ones are, but yeah. And then once you said that, they come and pick you up. What most competitions have is they have a tracker on you, so you're wearing a tracker the whole time, so you know exactly where you are when you land. And also, people doing silly things thermally, they can also see if people are doing bad thermals and getting people's way. So that's also another good thing. So if you've got people who are a bit reckless, and people say, "Oh, this person is a bit reckless," they can actually track his track and see what he's been doing. So it's actually quite good in that respect. So you go for a competition and you'll get a good week's flying. That's the main thing, and it's cheap. It's only going to cost you a couple of €100, and your flight and your accommodation, and you've got your trees sorted out for you, and you've also got local knowledge, so that's all catered for you, and it's just good fun. We'll also meet a lot of other people who are trying to do the same thing. So to a certain extent, I don't really go there to win. I just go there because it's a good week of flying, and you can guarantee I'm going to get sort of 20 hours flying time or more.
That's the thing, isn't it? Because even in a paragliding competition, except for the very top guys, that really everybody who's doing it is for their personal goals and personal enjoyment, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's brilliant fun.
A lot of people ask me, I've done 15 hours, I've been to the Red Ribbon Club, how do I keep developing? And there's a few different answers, and the right answer may vary from person to person. One's to go on a guided trip overseas, for example, Himalayas, or a mentor, CP mentor type program, Spain, Fly Spain do them, and others to sign up with a school, and there are instructors who specialise in taking people post CP and helping them through to pilot rating and beyond. And then others to do competitions, starting with the BCC.
What I would say though is when you're doing competitions, these competitions in say Spain, for example, you will get really quite strong conditions, which I wouldn't suggest people do them unless they're sure of the strong conditions. And you've picked the ones which are not going to have strong conditions, although you can't really guarantee that they're not going to have strong conditions. So it's like people say when you go to the Alps, you go and you don't fly the middle of the day, for example, which is the common thing, isn't it? Don't fly in the middle of the day. You wait until the afternoon and then fly. Well, in the competition, you're going to be flying in the middle of the day because that's when the window opens. So yeah, you've got to take that into consideration to a certain extent. These competitions in the Alps, but if it's in milder conditions in the Alps, you're fine, I think. But, yeah.
So for the first few years, if you did all the BCCs, they're held over several weekends in the year, you could have quite a few competitions under your belt, just flying in relatively benign UK competitions, without it costing you anything at all, really, other than a bit of petrol money.
And mix that with the waypoint challenge to get used to the idea of flying to a particular waypoint.
Yeah.
Could we just say one thing, that the waypoints aren't actually waypoints, they are actually cylinders.
Quite right. Yes.
Because most people refer to them as cylinders, because that's what they are. So I don't know if people realise what a cylinder is.
Well,
So what is
a waypoint where you could walk up a hill and
this is the thing. What a cylinder is when you go to a competition, all the competitions will have a set of waypoints which you download as part of the competition. And then what they do is on the day of the competition, you'll have a task board, and they'll have particular waypoints down the task board, and they'll have distances from those waypoints. And what they will be then is cylinders. So you'd have a particular waypoint, and then you would have, say, 20k. And what that means is it's 20k out from that waypoint as a cylinder. And what you actually do is you go from one cylinder to another, and all you've got to do is enter the cylinder. So you have a start cylinder. So a lot of people will be, or everybody be up behind the start cylinder. And as soon as the competition starts, which will be, they have a time that they will open the start window, which will be the start of the speed section. So that's when you're actually doing the speed. You're going against people for speed, and then you'll basically go from one cylinder to the next cylinder to the next cylinder to the next cylinder to the end of speed cylinder, and then you'll have to go into goal, and that's how it works.
Think of a waypoint as a point on the ground. Then there is a radius, and draw a circle around that point. And then think of it three-dimensional as a cylinder. And all you have to do is just tag the very edge of that cylinder to be able to tick it off and move on to the next
So
one.
you just have to get into the cylinder.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's no top and bottom to it.
But equally, there are other cylinders that are airspace.
Yeah.
You don't want to be tagging those.
But there's no maximum altitude to it. It's,
No.
it's from 0 to.
Yeah.
There's got to be a bottom.
Well, yes. No, in the sense that it isn't from 1 to 2,000 feet.
Right.
The one where there's just to complicate it, the one where there's a bottom is at the end of speed section, where it's at an altitude.
Oh, it is at 1,000.
So it'll be a turn point at 1,000 metres, radius, whatever.
So you have to
400
enter it
metres.
at a certain height.
So you have to enter it at 1,000 metres, or whatever.
Give or take.
So if you were beneath it, it wouldn't count as having got into it.
No.
Whoa, what you mean?
But by the time you get to doing that competition, you'll have it all under your belt, and you'll have practiced locally, and you'll know what you're doing. Don't worry about it now.
And until then, you probably won't reach the end one anyway.
Right, just one last thing, quick show of hands. Who's going to put their name down for the BCC this year? 2 of you. Okay. Oh, 3, 4. Good. Okay. I've got a bit of a
The beginning of the year is. I've got lots of learning for it.
Good.
More hours.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you for your attention.
Thanks to